son. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Gregor. Hey, Paul. We just had Neil Pionk telling us that seeing a game from up top was kind of something he hadn't done for a while, and he saw some things that maybe can help him. So is that something you can use now when you're trying to convince a player to sit out?
I don't think they're buying it. It's interesting because it's hard to describe to you, and maybe some fans that sit very low in the building can appreciate this, but the game is so much different at ice level, right? So much faster, so much closer. So then when you take a player and you put him up in a place that he hasn't seen the game, there's more time for everything. And sometimes that's a really good thing. So Neil plays at a really high level, right? He's an energy guy out there. Sometimes they come back and say, you know what, I can relax a little bit. There's more time than I think, or it feels like in practice and in game. So there is that value if they can see it like that. And I think certain players can pick out those things. I think, but you see the camera on, and I'm talking about the Winnipeg Jets, just anybody up in the stands, half the time they're on the phones, right? So I mean, that's the standard look, right, for a guy who's sitting out. So you need a guy that can actually understand what he's seeing and be interested in it. So I think Neil got full value out of that.
We'll go next to Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Weber.
Gregor, morning, Paul. At least based on yesterday, it looked like you're going to move Dubois back onto the wall. What can you tell us about that? And what was that conversation like with him?
So that conversation started a long time ago, and it's about where are you most comfortable? Center ice is his most comfortable position, but he came into the league basically as a winger. He had spent almost all his time, but it wasn't on left wing. It was on his off wing. It was on the right side. He's far more comfortable on the right than he is on the left. The genesis of this is wanting to get Matty Perreault back to the left. And so I've got kind of complete confidence that Andrew Copp's going to come back into our lineup. I'm not sure whether Nicky plays game one or not. We'll know in the next handful of days. He skated this morning, so that's a real positive with the group in a gold, but with the group, non-contact. So we want to look at a couple more things, the things that we do know. I mean, Stastny with Lowry and Appleton was good. So we figured that right away, right? That's just going to work. We know what Copp, Appleton, and Lowry look like. That's good. But if we had injuries and if something came up, how do we structure that kind of Dubois, Stastny without Nicky? You know, Copp can go there. In that case, who plays the right? Because we'd be short. So it's kind of me just, you know, the last look at guys in different positions when you start factoring who they might play against in the first round. You don't get last change. What's the match going to look like? So I want to see Pierre-Luc there. I see him as a centerman, you know, over the course of his career, but with Nicky out of our lineup, we don't have a lot of guys that can play the right side. So most of these guys play the left, and there is a certain amount of acceptance. We moved Copper over to the right. It was good. It was probably more effective than Perreault being there, but we'd like to see if we can get more action on if Dubois is on the right, just to help us prep going forward.
We'll go back to Ken Wiebe for a follow-up. Go ahead, Weber.
Just given his success in the playoffs and checking, is there a possibility that you could use him with Adam Lowry?
I mean, that's a possibility. I never felt that was a checking role that he had in the playoffs. It wasn't a shutdown. It was just head to head. So I'm not sold on that quite yet. And again, we're going to start on the road for 2. So how your checking line is structured isn't maybe most important. The other theory is it's really important because you need 2 lines on the road, where at home you only need kind of 1.5, if that makes sense to you. Like you can go a harder match at home than you can on the road. I just want to see him on the right, see what he can generate on the right side, Pierre-Luc. And then that will tell us where we kind of put him if we have the Nicky in or out kind of thing.
We'll go next to Mike McIntyre from the Winnipeg Free Press. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Gregor. Morning, Paul. You've mentioned a few times over the past week or so that, you know, a lot of preseason predictions maybe had you guys not even being in the playoffs. And
right.
Just for the record, I had you guys in the playoffs.
There we go.
But I wonder, is that something that you guys were kind of aware of even when the season started? And do you use that as a motivator? Like, hey, guys, they're already kind of counting us out and we haven't played a game yet.
So I didn't use it necessarily. So you understand where those predictions all come from, and they're almost all based on the season prior, right? So, you know, I mean, Dallas was an elite team coming into the regular season this year, and they missed the playoffs. But they went through a COVID thing. I mean, there's been a whole lot of other things that all teams had to go through. So you kind of get it coming in. We lost in the play-in, so we're outside that loop. Calgary's ahead of us. Van made it through. Van gets to be ahead of you. You've got Edmonton with their 2 players. You've got Toronto with their elite. So there's your 4 that mostly got picked. I used it more. What we did talk about was that this was going to be an extreme year in terms of the ups and downs, and part of that was going to be how people viewed us. So the more extreme case is the Montreal Canadiens, right? So they got off to this incredible start, started to slide a little bit, and fired their coach. Because here, when you're going, oh my God, you're right there, you're a contender. And then when we had the 2 weeks that we just had, well, the world's come to an end, and none of it's true. Right. So 2 weeks prior to that, we're thinking, well, we can still catch Toronto, but we're ahead of Edmonton. And then 2 weeks later, well, you might as well not even show up to the playoffs because you don't have a chance. So we just had to stay out of that idea. Making the playoffs this year, I think this year more than other, there were way more factors that were actually kind of outside your control. In a 56-game season, if you got beat up by injuries, that was really, really impactful. If you got a really brutal schedule right out of the gate, that could take you out of it. The COVID potential. I mean, for some teams, and maybe that is the difference for the Dallas Stars and some of these teams that got beat up by it. I mean, Vancouver, you saw what happened to them. They got both edges of that sword, right? They got the schedule at the start of the year, and then they got the COVID issue in the middle of the year, and that was it for them. So I think there are a lot more factors kind of outside, and we weathered them. We weathered them pretty darn well. We stayed healthy. We traveled well. We played really kind of good regular season hockey, enough to survive in an unusual division. And I'm saying that because the style of hockey in the North Division wasn't like anything that we were used to, right? So we had a lot of adaptation that had to happen over the course of the year. So I think making the playoffs was quite an accomplishment for our team. And I'm not saying that because, you know, there were 5 other teams that were way better than us. We like our team. We've got really strong pieces to our team. Like everybody, we've got some challenging pieces to our team. But I think making the accomplishment was really well done.
We'll go next to Kelly Moore from 680 CJOB. Go ahead, Kelly.
Hey, good morning, Paul. I know we've talked a lot about forward matchups for the upcoming playoff series, but what about defense pairs? I know you've favored balance over the course of the season, but are you looking more now at having 2 dedicated pairings that you feel good about putting out there against McDavid and Draisaitl?
Yeah, I think we go back to where we started, pending health on players. You know, we played around with Pionk and Morrissey playing together. I think you're going to see that at certain times. And it'll be, if we're chasing a game possibly and we need to load up some offense into one group, we'd probably take a look at that. If there's a line that's really given us a hard time and we have a hard time containing them, we may have to look at that. It might be if the 2 big guys get together in Edmonton, that might be something that we look at. But we'll start basically where we kind of worked our way to. Pionk comes back in, forward's really good in the last game, right? So we start to get those pairs back together a little bit. We'll wait to see where Tucker Pullman gets to here over the next few days, and spread it out a bit.
We'll go next to Scott Billick from the Winnipeg Sun. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Gregor. Paul, you know, I know there's 1 game to go left, but, you know, the season's essentially, or the regular season is essentially over. Nate Thompson was on here talking about how difficult it's been for him not to see his child since the season started. I guess, you know, based on what you've observed over this season, how difficult has it been, I suppose, for players? I mean, yourself, coaches, what have been maybe the biggest challenges during this? I mean, other than, well, I mean, isolation might be one of them, but, you know, just trying to figure out
Yeah, so I think that's the big one. I think that's the isolation has been the big one. So I really feel a need to put a qualifier on this answer, and that is there's a whole bunch of people out there going through way more than we are, right? So we don't have, because we're working, we don't have any of those concerns about paying bills, all those things that people have lost their jobs. I mean, there's real struggles out there. But there's also the exact same thing that everybody else is going through, we're going through, and then maybe even more so because we've been even more isolated, right? So that, and I maybe the simplest way is like the interaction with the fans, right? So you come to a game, it's not like you're walking around the stand, shaking everybody's hand, saying hello, but there's a real interaction there, a sense of community, a sense of togetherness is completely gone. And these guys, I mean, that's basically just them. Like, even think about, you get home, and if you've got a significant other at home, they're not hanging out with the significant others on all the other players. They're isolated, right? So this has been a real challenge from the mental health, I think, point of view. We talk about it this year, and probably something I've never really talked about before, how we're doing in that front, staying connected with each other, trying to create things, you know, team meals together, all that kind of stuff, because they're not four of them hanging out, you know, going out for lunch after together. It's kind of, you're here, you're at the rink, and then boom, you got to be isolated. I think it's been a real challenge. I think some players maybe flourish in this environment, right? If they were kind of loners, this is no different than their normal routine. But for a lot of us, I'm going to say it feels exactly like the way it feels for you, right? I mean, I'm going to assume you're at home based on the backdrop, and you don't get to come to the rink. You don't get to hang out with the other guys in your cohorts, your media guys, talk hockey, stuff like that. It's just not as much fun, right? Like hasn't been 2 weeks, man. I mean, it was March 11th last year when this thing started. So uncle, right? We all feel it. Like it's been a challenge for sure.
Just a couple more for Coach. We'll go next to Ken Weaver from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Weaver.
Paul, I just want to make sure there were no surprises or changes out of the morning skate regarding the lineup.
No, same as yesterday.
Okay, and then one quick one. How will the taxi squad be used or managed? Are there limitations like last year, or in terms of how many people you'll carry or want around the team, or how's that going to work?
We'll probably, we'll just keep the taxi squad. We're trying to make as few changes as we possibly can. And then we will have then black aces. So that concept will still be here. Guys that maybe necessarily wouldn't travel with us, but they'll skate kind of on alternating days. We'll have, Pascal Vincent and his staff will handle that. We don't want to bring 8 more guys into the room just on protocol alone, right? We don't want more people in a room. We want less people in a room. So we'll just kind of operate the way we have. We have our taxi squad. We'll keep those guys. We may make some adjustments. I think it's probably prudent for us to have 4 goalies come with us, right? Because you do have to have 3 now with the protocol. So if something happened with a guy, and because we can't put a guy on a commercial flight and bring him into our bubble, right? He'd have to either drive or fly privately. So we'll bring enough to cover that off, but no more than we have to.
And final question to Mark Spector from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Mark.
All right, Paul.
Good, Mark.
Good. Listen, I hope I'm not being too forward. Ask you to kind of think ahead of tonight's game into the playoff series. But I'd like your perspective on the thing here in Edmonton is Draisaitl and McDavid. Sometimes they're on a line together. Sometimes they're apart. It's been all over the map here. As an opposing coach and a guy that's going to be looking at that scheme pretty quick, maybe you could you, without giving up any state secrets, could you tell me how hard it is to tackle that pair when they're apart or together? What's worse for you?
Yeah. I don't know. Somebody's done some analytics probably on what they generate together and what they don't. But I think you have to do bigger analytics. What does the whole team generate when they're together? What does the whole team generate when they're apart? I think at the end of the day, that number is going to be grotesquely high either way. Right. So it's not like they go from banging 104 points and then they don't get any when they're together. So this is just good for them either way they do it. Right. There are some tendencies to it. Home, road, off timeouts, off power plays, some places maybe where you can expect it to happen. It's more likely to happen that these 2 guys will come out together in these situations, down a goal, those kind of things. So you try to prep for that. And you're going to want to have your top 6 and top 4 against either of them when they're together. And one of those lines will have to take them when they're together. So we're not going to change our lines when they change their lines, right? We can't be operating on that because you can't anticipate when it's coming out. So we're going to have to be really, really good all the time, Mark, because they are.
Thanks very much, Coach.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back with